Hello, a very warm, yes, it is very warm. Welcome to The Big Picture. We are live on University Radio Nottingham. As always, I am Felix. And I think the music is still playing, which is rather exciting. Let's do that again. Hello, a very warm welcome to The Big Picture, live on University Radio Nottingham. I am Felix, and it is very warm, which means I'm slightly dazed. But anyway, let's get cracking. Hello, Felix, says one of our listeners. Who could that be? Now, let us begin. Who have we got today? Well, we've got URN professional, Rebecca.
Hello.
Hello. URN veteran, Titus. You're a veteran now, Titus, sorry.
Hello, Felix.
Hello, and yes, he went to university that also produced Oxford University graduate and won an essay competition, I think, in year 4, didn't you, in history?
Something like that.
James Shipley.
That's me. Hello.
Hello. Right, what are we talking about today is the vaping, government regulation on that. We're also going to be talking about Labour's plan to ban any new oil and gas, and we'll be talking, in Britain that is, and we'll also be talking about a third topic, which is the debating union and free speech on university, basically. So let's start with vapes. So the Nanny States Index 2023 lists the UK of the 30 countries it assesses as the tightest on cigarettes, but the weakest or most liberal on vapes. Statistics show that 10.4% of 11 to 15-year-olds are vaping. 10.4%. And just so people know, as a percentage, that's more people than nationally smoke. 40% of 18-year-olds have tried smoking, or at least have said they've tried smoking. So what do we think to plans from the government to regulate vaping? I think there was particular targeting on different colours, green, blue, red, whatever. For children, basically that would appeal to children. And there are lots of shops that are selling vapes to children. What are your general thoughts to vaping, though? First of all, James.
What are my thoughts on vaping? Well,
do you vape yourself, young man?
I do not vape myself, and though I was tempted to take the pro-vape side just because this panel's quite anti-vape, I have to admit I am also quite anti-vape. I think it's sort of like cigarettes, like 50, 60, 70 years ago, right? Before we knew the real long-term, or like really knew the real long-term negative effects of them, right? So we're still in this sort of lack of regulation because they're such a new thing. The government has yet to like catch up in the same way that they did with cigarettes, because these sorts of things are the same sort of things that they did with cigarettes, you know, like changing the packaging so it can't be, you know, appealing to kids, trying not to sell them to kids in general, kind of thing. So I think in general, yeah, I mean, this is a positive change. I'm not a big vaping fan, even though they are better than cigarettes. We think it should be noted, you know, they are better than cigarettes. We still don't really know the full like long-term health effects of vaping. So though they're better than cigarettes, they're still a negative for you. And also, and this is the problem with a lot of kids vaping, is that in a lot of cases they become a sort of gateway into just smoking when you're older. You know, like you have all these young kids vaping and then they go into smoking. So if anything, though it has the positive effect of stopping people from smoking because they vape instead, in a lot of cases it has the opposite effect and gets a lot of people into smoking. So I think vapes are I'm wary to say necessary evil, but they're a necessary thing because, again, health-wise they're better than smoking. But I do think that a lot more of these sorts of like regulations around them is needed because, again, they're still very, you know, they're still in a way an unknown for the long-term health effects, but from what we know so far, there's still a very negative health effect to them.
Rebecca, would you agree with that?
Yes, so I'm against sort of vaping. Certainly, like with children, we don't know what the long-term effects are. Obviously, a lot of them have nicotine, so, you know, I think in principle, they probably do some level of damage to your lungs. Again, obviously, it doesn't have the same effects as smoking, but we still don't really want to encourage like that sort of dependency and like that sort of habit. I would also say like things like vaping, I don't believe it's not restricted in the same way in public spaces as smoking is. So obviously, like you're prohibited from smoking in certain, like restaurants and things like that, pubs, etc. And like quite a lot of my friends smoke, and my understanding is that they can like vape in sort of pubs and things like that, but they can't smoke in them. So I think we should sort of encourage more regulations around where you can and can't like vape as well.
Titus, as the member of the more of the right-wing perspective, is this not state overreach for our independent freedoms?
I don't think it is. Obviously, the panel seems to be quite united in this one, but I'm a Conservative, and the government is bringing this in, the Conservative government, and I think it's only right that the ability of children to access vapes should be restricted. We don't know their long-term health effects, and they, as James has noted, can be a gateway into smoking, which is very damaging. They are quite a new thing, and there is very little regulation in this area. I think it's perfectly fine that the regulators are catching up, and that there is some brought in. One difference between smoking and vaping, which might actually make vaping worse, is that when you smoke, you obviously have one cigarette, and it sort of burns down as you go through it, and then you come to the end of that cigarette. When you vape, you can literally just keep going. I see people with vapes, sitting down, and they just keep puffing. They can do it for hours. You can literally, you can vape a lot more. You can inhale a lot more of that stuff than you can with a cigarette. And so I think, in that sense, whatever potential harm there is from vaping, it could be a lot more significantly applied to the body, because it's actually, you breathe in a lot more of it, because it's potentially endless, provided you fill in the pods. So I think that is also something to think about, and children especially, who haven't developed the self-control that adults ought to have developed. It's important that is regulated.
Well, a unanimous panel. Wow. I want to know what James and Titus think to the point that Rebecca made there about, sorry, I've remembered it now. Sorry, I'm so hot. About where you can vape. Do you think it should be the same as smoking in terms of where you can and can't vape?
Yeah, probably, to be honest. I think that's quite fun. I don't think that the effects of secondhand vape are like as anywhere near as bad as secondhand smoke. I don't know the science specifically, but I'm pretty sure it's not as bad. But even so, I think letting people, part of the not letting people smoke in pubs and stuff, part of it is just because people don't want pubs filled with smoke when they're trying to sit there and enjoy a nice drink. But also I think part of it is to try and make it more difficult to smoke, and in another way sort of limit it. And I think that would be another way to do it. Like Titus said, if you can just sit there just like puffing on a vape non-stop, like if you're in a pub or whatever, then there's nothing stopping you from doing that. Whereas if you have to go outside every half an hour to do it, then it becomes you're doing it a lot less. And so yeah, I think there should probably be the same limitations as to where you can vape and where you can smoke, in my opinion.
Titus?
Yeah, I do think vaping can be antisocial, especially if it's in a confined space. Indoors, the smoke dissipates a lot less because the air is a lot more static. And so I think there should be some restrictions on where people can vape. Obviously, like we said many times, we're not sure what the health impacts are, but I do think it would be wise to bring in some regulations in that area.
Okay, again, unanimous. Let's focus. I want to actually expand on the whole idea of the nanny state. We've talked about vaping. That's obviously the focus of what's been in the news recently. Britain has, the Titus, as I mentioned in the introduction, rules on smoking, and we have one of the lowest amount of percentages of smoking in Europe. There is a plan in New Zealand that's been put forward that anyone born after the year 2008, so people that would be turning 16 next year, would not be able to ever buy cigarettes. Labour have been looking into that, as they haven't said either way what they're going to do about it. They haven't said if they're going to support that motion or not. Is that something you would like to see, that anyone So basically, anyone who's currently smoking can still buy cigarettes, but it means that no one new will be able to buy cigarettes. Is that something that you would support? Let's go to you first, Titus, this time.
Yeah, instinctively, that does feel a bit off, I think, to be that heavy-handed with something, even if it is detrimental to your health, is not something that a conservative would want to, not want to be. And I think when you do completely ban things, the black markets can arise. I'm sure there aren't going to be loads of kids who are going around looking for cigarettes on the black market, but it could still happen, and I no doubt there would be fewer safety. They would be less safe. Obviously, they're not getting checked, and they could be laced with other things. So I think that is maybe, not the best approach. I do think that the government should the crackdowns that are on smoking right now are appropriate, and the government should look at ways to dissuade people from smoking, and especially dissuade people from starting smoking. And I think we've been quite successful with that in this country. So, I don't think we need to go that far, and I think that, is unconservative.
Rebecca?
I would say it's quite a heavy-handed approach. I mean, I've mentioned this before, that I think that the only problem is potentially that there will be like a black market then created for smoking, or that like adults or who can smoke will then just buy them for younger adults or children. And I think that potentially could be a problem, and then you can't, tax it and things like that could create issues. So I would be concerned from that point of view. It'd be interesting to see whether it works, and particularly when we think about things like climate change. Obviously, cigarettes and also vaping are they're not good. They're disposable. They're very bad for the environment. So I can kind of understand the want for this heavy-handed approach, but at the same time, I do have some reservations.
James, are you going to complete the set and agree as well?
It's. I think it's an interesting, way of doing it. I think it's a very innovative, in a way of doing it, and so I like that. But I do kind of agree with the rest of the panel. I do think it's a little bit heavy-handed. And, I mean, as Titus said, in this country at least, we have been very good at, like, reducing the amount of people smoking. And I think if vaping is, like, kind of dealt with by, like, new regulations kind of thing, I think we'll just continue to be on that track where smoking continues to, like, the amount of people smoking decreases year on year. So I think in this country we're doing it good enough anyway. Apart from the vaping problem, if you deal with that, you don't really need such a heavy-handed approach.
And I think that the most effective way to dissuade people from smoking is to create a culture where it's not the done thing, or it's less acceptable, less socially acceptable to smoke. And I think we are on the way to that. And I imagine the vaping regulations could also to help that.
Yeah, exactly. So I think you stomp down vaping. You deal with that problem, you regulate around that, then I think, the problem is, wary to say dealt with, but, you're dealing with the problem better than just trying to ban it for everyone. Again, I do think it's an interesting approach, but I do think it's a bit too heavy-handed.
Okay, interesting. Well, we've done New Zealand. Let's move over to Australia. They are banning vapes completely, except for if you have a doctor's note and get it from a pharmacy, so as a way to replace smoking. Is that something that you would support? Rebecca, I'm going to start with you this time.
I mean, I think, again, like an outright ban might be a bit extreme, and like I said before with the whole black market thing, I think it would be quite easy to get like vapes illegally or have them sort of imported. So I'm not sure that is the best idea. I think, as like we were saying before, is like if you discourage it in public places or make it really hard to vape in public places, and also just culturally discourage it, then that's much better of an approach, I think. Then you can tax it and stuff as well.
I think on your point about the black market, maybe I would say there's a slight difference with vapes, because vapes are a much newer thing. They're a more recent invention, and so there's less of a precedent for people vaping, and there's less of a culture around vaping. So I think there's if they've cracked down on it not long after it's arisen, maybe there's a smaller chance of people still desiring it and looking illegally, looking for illicit vapes. But I think I'd broadly agree with your sentiment.
James?
See, I disagree.
Here we go.
I disagree with Titus saying that there isn't a culture, like a vaping culture. I think that a ban, this kind of thing 10 years ago, I think would have worked. Because back then it was, you get a vape because you're trying to, quit smoking or whatever. But I think now it's too late because there is this culture around vaping, I think so many young people and stuff, it's such a big thing now, at least in, my people I know, it's become such a big thing that I think there is enough demand now. Like, I think it's exploded as a market, as shown by the stats. It's exploded as a market, and I think there is enough of a demand now that I think that a black market, I guess, quote unquote, would develop. I think I think if you do a ban like this 5 years ago, it works fine. But I think now the culture has developed, and so I think something like this wouldn't work.
Yeah. I don't know about that one. I think, yes, there are a lot more people that vape now than maybe 10 years ago, but I don't think they've been quite doing it for long enough to get really hung up about it, compared to smoking, which has a long history, and people, chewed tobacco back in the 18th century. Yeah, so I'd maybe disagree with you on that one.
We've had a message in. Good luck, Titus, with your dissertation. That's come in.
Thank you, Daniel.
Also, let the state fight the black market. Okay, I'm curious, really, to what extent do you all believe on these sort of topics? Should the state intervene on other things? So we've talked about vaping and smoking. What about things like food, alcohol? We obviously on the Pulse we talked about the British culture on alcohol can cause problems. I don't know if you have a problem with that, Titus, as much as the phrase problematic can cause problems. I don't know. What do you think to that about the sugar tax? And of course, for a lot of families, things like fast food is a much cheaper option than more healthy food, and that's sort of one of the reasons why often they're bought in a lot. Also, maybe because they do taste nice for a lot of people. But James, what do you think with other things? And is it the state's right to intervene on these things?
Wow. Back in third year, I did this module at my old university called political philosophy. And I think there is a very genuine, if we had 5 hours, we could talk for hours at a time about what the true role of the state is, that kind of thing. Why do we consent to the state? What does that mean? What the implications of that are? But we're not, we're here for the real deal stuff. And I think, yes, the state should have a say in public health and public safety. And at the end of the day, that is what this is, right? And I do think that, stuff like the sugar tax, I can see the argument of it being a bit of government overreach kind of thing. And I think with the government doing stuff like this, you should have it should provide alternatives. You can't just have a sugar tax and not have, ways to make healthier foods cheaper or that kind of thing. I think if you're just gonna if you just implement the sugar tax, for example, and don't help out in any other way, all you're gonna get is poor people struggling even more because the food they buy is now, or everyone's struggling even more, but it's going to affect poorer people especially. It's just going to make food more expensive. You need to offer, I guess, positive alternatives as well as doing the public safety, banning things, sugar tax, that kind of thing.
Yeah, because Diet Coke is just not good enough, is it?
Exactly. Sponsored. But yeah, so that's what I think. I think that the way we view the state in this modern world, the way the state is, it does have a say in public health and public safety. So I think that it's fine that they do things for the benefit of public health and public safety.
Rebecca, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I am a fan of state intervention in, but what I would say is I think a lot of the time when people do buy the sort of unhealthy foods, it is often because it's cheaper. And also when it comes to navigating what is and isn't healthy, I feel like there just isn't a lot of educational public knowledge on that. And I think one thing that would be helpful is if there were more laws and regulations about sort of brands having to state if something is actually kind of unhealthy or what it's got in it, because I think a lot of the time people buy things thinking that they're healthy and not realizing the actual nutritional value of it. So I think that would be more helpful, because when you're buying something like a cigarette or you go out to buy alcohol, I don't think anyone's thinking that's a healthy choice. So you're kind of that you are making an actual decision in that. Whereas with things like if you're going out to like buy a meal, or even if you're just like buying like a takeaway meal or something like that, if it's sold to you as healthy, then that's not fair. And I think the state should have like a role maybe in trying to make that clearer to the public.
Good point. Titus.
Yeah, I think I largely agree with what was said before. I don't need to reiterate it too much, but yeah, the government is responsible for to some extent for people's overall well-being and setting out a framework so that people can choose to live healthy lives. And I think that there are subtle ways they can do that. It should obviously be with care and without trying to interfere too much. I think a sugar tax, there is a risk that you end up just penalising, like we've been saying, people who are poorer. And actually, there are other strategies that should be looked at as well. I think George Osborne was very keen on these kind of measures, and in fact still is. So I would probably disagree with him, but I don't think that attempting to help people to live healthier lives is necessarily a bad thing.
Oh, again, unanimous panel almost. So, wonderful. We've had another message in. We've got, two. Rest in peace, the closing down of Jimbo's. And man, this James guy is a genius.
Wow, I love whoever put that in.
Yeah, you've got a fan, James.
Many fans.
Also, before I forget, a big shout out, of course, to Joy and 5 other people who have got their birthday party that James and I left to get here. James continues to have nice messages about him. So shout out to all of you. Enjoy your birthday. I couldn't think of a related song, so I've just gone with Take That one.
This is URN.
Hello, a very warm welcome to The Big Picture, live on University Radio Nottingham, with me, as always, and I am still, Felix Hawes. Our next topic then is Labour are planning to ban all new oil and gas projects in Britain. Sorry, to the listeners, I'm so overwhelmingly hot in here. Wonderful episode of The Big Picture, listening from Barcelona. The Big Picture has gone international, from Sarah, Ella, Isabel and Joe. Thank you very much for listening. I hope it is as hot there as it is here. Please come to policy, which I imagine didn't come from Sarah, is on there. So no new oil and gas projects in Britain under Labour. Obviously this will go towards our net zero targets. But as so much of our resources rely on oil and gas, does this mean we're going to be importing oil and gas from abroad, which might actually be worse for our CO2? What do you think to that, Rebecca?
I mean, I think this is a difficult one because I am, like, in principle, in a fan of, like, banning any new investment in oil and gas and things like that. But I also recognise the fact that we do need it on some level. I don't think importing it from other countries is a good idea, and I also think that we need to invest more in renewable energy. I feel like that's where a lot of our problems are, is that we're just not investing enough money in renewable energy and things like that. So I think that's the issue, is we can't transition properly until we've done that.
James, do you think the response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which has made us realise how energy dependent we are on foreign powers, is a sign that shows that we should ban more of our resources in our country?
Yes. I disagree with the framing of the question, but yes, I do agree. Kind of like Rebecca, I'm with it, because I do like banning more oil and gas drilling, because obviously we're aiming to save the planet here, and we're not going to do that by using more fossil fuels than we already are. And I like how Labour's talking about, they're saying we don't need this because we're going to do, this green revolution kind of thing with energy, which I think is good. I think it's a policy proposal, which is what we have complained about many a times here, is that Labour have no actual policy proposals. Here is an actual policy proposal, and so I like that. So yeah, I think do ban it, in my opinion. I think the main problem with energy security, I remember hearing this once, and I genuinely might just be regurgitating what Rory Stewart said. So if so,
well, look, you're not the only Rory Stewart fan on the panel today. So
he's not.
Read his books; they're very good. I think it was him, talked about how the main problem isn't actually the amount of energy we produce, it's energy storage, which is the real issue. But that's expensive and boring and expensive, even, really expensive to deal with. But the main problem is that, not the lack of being able to produce energy. So if we, instead of, mining more, you do renewables, work on energy storage. This isn't going to, remove any jobs either, because there's still, this is just a ban on new oil and gas mining. This isn't like
it does put an end date on the jobs that exist.
It harms the industry for sure, but it's not like an immediate, because some people are comparing this to the closing of the coal mines and stuff like that, and this is not the same thing, because again, you're not putting people out of a job here for probably quite a while. So yeah, I'm for the ban. There are renewable problems. If we're actually serious about fixing the climate, which we should be, this kind of thing is going to hurt, but it's, in my opinion, wholly necessary. Because and the Tories try to talk the talk with the environment, apart from Liz Truss was quite, not talking the talk about it. But they try to, climate change is an accepted thing here in the UK as a problem. But if you're not going to do stuff like this, then you're not really taking it that seriously, in my opinion. You're not taking it seriously enough that the problem needs to be taken, So I think stuff like this, yes, it's going to hurt people, energy security, potentially, if you don't deal with it properly, but necessary.
Interesting. And you mentioned the Conservatives. It's important to note that our CO2 emissions have halved since the Conservative Party took office in 2010. Titus, the planet's boiling.
Yeah.
The degrees are going up to dangerous levels. It's potential that the almost entirety of east of England, including my house, might be underwater. Surely we need to tackle this by not using any more resources which are going to damage our atmosphere and therefore our planet anymore. And this is the right policy to do.
Well, look, Liz Truss, her constituency is in Norfolk, so I don't think some of us would be too devastated if Norfolk did sink into the North Sea. But in all seriousness, I do think climate change is a very serious issue that we need to address. But the simple reality is that the UK contributes, I think, less than 2% to global CO2 emissions. So even if tomorrow our emissions fell to zero, it would not change any of the serious effects that we're going to experience from climate change. So if we want to make a genuine difference to the planet and to mitigate the potential harms from climate change, then we have to be engaging internationally. The first, the primary way that we're going to tackle this is international forums like COP, encouraging countries like China, like India, to decarbonize and to adjust their energy strategy to one that is low carbon. Because currently India has, they're opening loads of new coal plants because they're developing quickly, and coal is the investment needed to create a coal plant is quite low compared to cleaner sources like nuclear, and so it's quite an attractive method, especially if there's a lot of coal going around. So I think if we're really serious about tackling this problem, we have to be looking abroad as well. The argument for bringing down our own emissions is, if you're going to go to the Chinese and the Indian government and you're saying to them, you need to cut your emissions, then obviously you need to be doing that yourself as well. And so I think the Conservatives have done a great job at that so far. And if they were going to, if Labour's plan to cut new oil and gas licenses, to ban them, probably would have a very small impact on the climate, but it would be more of a signal that we're going in this green direction. And but I don't know how helpful it would be for our current geopolitical situation. I'm a big fan of nuclear power. I think for our electricity, we should be heading in that direction. But obviously, that doesn't address things like heating. So and gas is still needed for that. So I'd probably be opposed to that measure.
Interesting. We've had a message in. Norfolk listener here don't forget the king also has a home in Norfolk. I'm not sure Felix would want him drowning, or Titus, to be honest. Okay, so though I get your point, Titus, about other countries contributing more. Of course, China, they pump out more CO2 emissions than all other developed countries combined. But that being said, the UK has to do its part. You sort of touched on that. We need to lead the way. Banning oil and gas is sensible. Wouldn't you say, for us to do that? I know you've sort of touched on that.
Well, I think with gas specifically, it is quite a compared to coal, compared to other ways of generating electricity that are common. Its carbon emissions are much lower, and it is much cleaner. So I think if we're looking at a realistic path to net zero, gas has got to be part of that. And we do have a lot of gas in the North Sea, and I think that at this stage, banning gas licenses would be a mistake. You also, obviously, I don't need to make too much of it, but with the situation in Ukraine and Russia, and the amount of gas that Russia produces, I don't think that bringing more gas onto the market, bringing more of it online, is going to be unhelpful.
Well, what do you make to those points, Rebecca, that Titus mentioned there about China and about other countries, and that even if we did remove all of our carbon emissions, it's not going to make any difference to the sort of side effects that the UK, or indeed any other country, would actually suffer from?
I'm not sure I agree in the sense that every small amount matters. This is what climate scientists are saying. It does. It's not just about big changes here. Minor ones all matter too. And also I would say that I think it's really important to sort of with the COPs and trying to sort things out internationally, but we don't really have much control over what China do, and I think the thing is we do have more control domestically. So I think it's partly about setting an example, but it's also about the fact that we can kind of control what we do here, and so we should try and do that as much as possible, I think.
James, would you agree with Rebecca?
Yes, I do agree, but I do think that the point about international cooperation is very important, because as Titus said, we're not going to be able to do this without the whole world being on board. Compared to the rest of the world, we are a very small amount, but I do think you gotta be the leader, because the COPs and stuff like that are nice, but they aren't really working well enough. And I think a lot of that is genuinely on the responsibility of developed countries. Because I think the problem was the COP. The one before last was this big one where they signed this big thing about commitment from developing countries to not use as much carbon emitting stuff, and then developed countries would start a fund to help support more more eco-friendly industries in those developing countries. And then this COP was basically the developing countries saying the fund still doesn't exist a year later, what's happening? And so I think the responsibility is, in that case, on developed countries. We've got to kind of pay for it, because the argument kind of is, from developing countries, is we, us in the West, the UK and stuff, emitted all of these, used tons of coal when we were going through our development, and now we're developed. Who are we to try and tell developing countries not to do the same thing for the good of their population, right? So I think the UK does have to be a leader in, preventing climate change kind of thing. And I think to do that, for one thing, you can't seem to be hypocritical by continuing to allow oil and gas contracts, and also you have to actually pay for new industries in these developing countries. In my opinion, you need to actually support these developing countries, because otherwise, India and China and developing countries in Africa, which in the next few decades is where the big new area of industrial revolution is going to be. They're gonna, look for the cheapest option, which is, like Titus said, it's coal, and that makes complete sense. So unless us in the West support them in building more eco-friendly industries, eco-friendly ways of producing power, us banning these new contracts is, like I said, kind of meaningless because it's such a small effect. I think they do but need to go hand in hand. I think you need to have international cooperation, and to do that, we need to be seen as being a leader in this type of thing, and actually put our money where our mouth is, and commit funds for aid to develop these new industries.
It is important to note, actually, that although I brought China up, the USA per capita is emitting more CO2 than China. It's just China's obviously got a whoppingly large population, though that is decreasing. Right, we're going to wrap up there. And
could I just quickly,
go on, Titus,
quickly
as
a note, a culinary, that I do not wish to see Norfolk sink into the sea. I hope that Sandringham lasts for another 1,000 years.
And the monarchy along with it.
And the monarchy along with it, of course, Felix. And your lovely house in Ely.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, if it gets too hot, then I suppose this girl is going to be on fire.
We're on campus and we're online.
University
Radio Nottingham.
Hello, welcome back to The Big Picture. We are live on University Radio Nottingham, and a big shout out to Ollie's cousin who's getting married today, and to Jenny because she wanted a shout out and she'll be listening in as well, so thank you very much. Right, our last topic is about free speech on university. This is a topic that we've spoken about before. This is in the light of Kathleen Stock, I think I've said her name correctly, who there were a lot of protests about her being able to speak at the Oxford Union, which is a very old debating union that's independent of the student union at Oxford. Lots of very famous people have spoken there. A lot of controversial speakers have spoken there, such as Marine Le Pen, Jacob Rees-Mogg, Nigel Farage. Controversial, I should say, for universities, maybe not in other circles. So this is about who actually has the right to talk on campus. Of course, this very university has had its own set of controversial speakers over the years as well. So it's a question of who can and cannot talk at university. So I'm going to go to you first, Titus, on this one.
Yeah, so I really think there's two questions here. There's firstly the question of in a society where there are certain parameters about what is acceptable discourse or acceptable ideas, what do we do with people who fall outside of the sort of the norm, the majority opinion and what is acceptable? Do we allow them to speak, or do we try and shut them up? And then the second question is, how do we or what are acceptable ideas to express? Where do we draw the line, and what today is acceptable? And I think the views that Kathleen Stock was promoting were, until very recently, uncontroversial, and she would consider herself a moderate, and the way that she would want to tackle the issue from a policy perspective is certainly she would see that as a compromise. And so I think on that second question, we were going, okay, what are the parameters? What is sort of normal discourse? What are normal ideas? These are ideas that have been around for a long time, and actually, I don't think that they. If you spoke to most people on the streets, I don't think people would say that these fall outside of accepted parameters. Now, the other question, obviously, is people who are controversial or who do have ideas that are unacceptable, do you allow them to speak? You mentioned that the Oxford Union had some controversial speakers in the past. Jacob Rees-Mogg, I think, is probably one of the less controversial ones. They've also had Tommy Robinson. And people like him who's associated with groups that are known for racism. Do you allow them to speak? And the Oxford Union is a place that encourages debate and makes a point of allowing people to speak, even if they're slightly outside of the accepted parameters of public discourse. So for the Oxford Union, it's completely normal for them to have someone who lots of people would strongly disagree with. But I also think that on this issue, the views that Kathleen Stock has put forward are probably the majority of people in the country would agree with or find completely normal.
Well, both excellent questions there, Titus, and this is always the crux of a free speech debate, is what is acceptable. But you do make a very good point about what do we do with people who hold these views, because they're still going to hold them, whether they are allowed to talk or not. James, what do you make to Titus' questions and this whole topic?
Well, I'm going to use the example of Tommy Robinson because I think that's an easier or a more clear example, I guess you could argue. And So I don't think that the Oxford Union should have let him talk, to be honest, because I think that it legitimizes hate speech, right? And I think in a way this is what this argument is. It's the classic, free speech versus hate speech. You should limit, not allow hate speech, but while at the same time not, harming free speech. And I think that a figure who espouses hate speech, like Tommy Robinson, for example, should not be allowed to, almost legitimize that hate speech by giving it a platform to share with, potentially millions of people. Because the Oxford Union, discussions and stuff are put on YouTube for, potentially millions of people to see. So to legitimize hate speech on a platform for millions of people, I think is not a good idea in my opinion. And I do think that there is a question of, what is considered hate speech. I think that's the real crux of the argument here, is on a case-by-case basis, what is hate speech and what is free speech, or what should be allowed.
Can I quickly come back at you on that one, James? Because I think you're right in identifying that this is the crux. The crux is what is hate speech?
Yeah.
Where are the norms for today's society of what's acceptable? But I also think that the Oxford Union allowing Tom Robinson to speak did not legitimise his views. If you look at the rest of the media, the rest of public discourse, he is, outside of that, and everyone, despite him speaking there, knows that roughly what he thinks, and that the type of politics that he's been a part of is unacceptable. And I don't think that they've legitimised his views in any way. And the Oxford Union is a place that one of their core principles is having a debate, even if that ruffles feathers, and they are a debating union. So I think that to say that he's just sort of been subsumed into the discourse and that means that he's been legitimised is actually wrong. He wouldn't have been allowed to write a column in a paper, in a mainstream paper. So I think the Oxford Union is set apart. It's a different place compared to most of our public discourse. But I do think that the main question with Kathleen Stock is, are her views acceptable?
Rebecca, what do you think to this issue?
I mean, I agree with what the crux of the issue is. I think I disagree with the fact that having Tommy Robinson on a platform doesn't in any way legitimize his position, because I think a lot of the issue with a debate is that there are two sides, or seemingly two kind of acceptable sides to have on some level, and that by having a debate there's potentially some kind of middle ground to be had, and sometimes there just isn't. I don't know whether I'd be interested to know if Oxford Union has ever or would ever have someone who was a climate change denier, or someone who thought that the earth was flat. Would they put them on? Would that be a debate?
I think you could still, certainly with the latter, you could still have an interesting discussion with that person. That doesn't mean that people would listen to it and go, oh yeah, maybe I should think the way that they think. But you could maybe understand how people in the modern age come up with these worldviews that are so contrarian to the way that everyone else thinks. And that could be a productive discussion. I don't think that the vast majority of people listening will suddenly go, oh yeah, that guy's got a point, the Earth's round. But I think you would discover how they think, which could be productive. And the Oxford Union is, as I said, a debating union, and it's about constructing arguments and understanding how people think, and it's a place for this kind of thing, for contrarians to come and be controversial.
I think when you talked about climate change deniers, I'm pretty certain that David Icke has been on the Oxford Union, who's of course controversial for many different reasons, too long to list. So this is the thing, is that everybody agrees that hate speech is not something that should be said. And James, you've well, not everyone, but everyone here. James, you've come up with the issue here. Where is that hate speech line? A lot of people would have thought that. As Titus says, a lot of people would agree with Kathleen Stock, maybe even the majority of the population, but a lot of people find what she says to be highly offensive. And this is the issue, is that we are not unanimous in this. It's certainly an interesting one. Where is that line for you, James? Where is that line of what's acceptable and what's not acceptable?
Well, I think if you're discriminating against people based on their identity, their race, their gender, or other things, I'm being wary to not talk. It's difficult to not talk exactly about what Kathleen Stock said. But if you're discriminating against that kind of thing, someone's identity, I think and that discrimination potentially encourages. Well, no, I think discrimination does just, when put on a platform, and again, in my opinion, though not shared, legitimised. I think that does could lead to even more negative things, you know.
But if someone makes a truth claim about themselves or about the world, and you don't think that stands up to the world that you see it and the way that you would understand the meaning of certain words, does that then mean that you attack someone personally, or does that then mean that you've that is hate speech? Because what I see Kathleen Stock is doing in her, I haven't read her book, but I did watch the documentary Gender Wars, which Channel 4 aired on the same day, and I found that quite interesting and helpful to see both sides, and I think they portrayed it relatively well, and obviously it's a fraught debate, but I think they captured both perspectives. But I think Kathleen Stock would say that she is looking at the how do you create policy? How do you interact with things that everyone holds in common? You know, a common reality. And if I question something that you're saying about yourself, or you're saying about a group of people, does that mean that I am then that is hateful? If I don't accept a claim to truth that you are making, because I don't think that is, but maybe some other people disagree.
Well, I'm interested also with this, James. What about someone like Jeremy Corbyn? He has been accused of anti-Semitism. Is he someone that should be allowed to have a platform when he has been accused of viewing people of Jewish origin differently to everybody else? Others would argue that's not the case with Corbyn.
Well, and that's kind of the problem as well. I think there are a lot of problems related to this, because I think with the Jeremy Corbyn example, I think even though people would say that, like, there's a lot of people that would say he is, you know, probably anti-Semitic, there, you know, you would struggle to find someone saying that he regularly espouses hate speech, you know, whereas with other figures, Tommy Robinson, George Galloway, I think it's a lot more cut and dry, you know. There's a lot more bad, negative, discriminatory, hateful things that they're saying that are dangerous, you know. But I think, to be honest, with this whole situation, I think it's sort of worked out fine. In these situations where you have a disagreement about what is hate speech or not, the people who think it is, and people who think that these people shouldn't be given a platform, are going to protest. So I think it's fine, you know. She wanted to speak, people protested against it. Is it not those people's right to protest, you know?
Well, yeah.
Sure, it's her right to... If we're going by this whole free speech thing, yes, it's her right to say what she says. It's equally the right of the protesters to protest and say that there's a problem with, you know, in our opinion, there's a problem with what you're saying. It's hate speech in there, you know?
Rebecca, where do you draw the line? Where do you think that line should be drawn?
I feel like the thing is with when you have like controversial speakers on, and as far as like the whole hate speech, what qualifies the things, I think I don't have an issue with people like Kathleen Stock actually going on, you know, having like the Oxford Uni debate and things like that. What I have an issue with is when people such as her come on a platform and are not properly interrogated for their views or are not properly questioned about them. So for instance, I have read some of Kathleen Stock's book, and a lot of what she does is make generalizations or statements and does not substantiate them, which is, in my opinion, a massive problem. I think it's fine to come on and, you know, express your point of view. Say if you were somebody who thought that the earth is flat, that, you know, come on and say that. But I think other people have a right to then question that and go, well, you know, this doesn't add up or this doesn't stand up and things like that, because otherwise then that is just misinformation.
Right, well, I think we are going to have to wrap up there as it is 6 o'clock. But what an interesting discussion. I feel like Titus probably had something to say there. But
I was just going to quickly add to your protest point. That I absolutely believe in the right to protest as well, and I think the students who disagree with her, it was good that they went and protested, but I do think that you start to get into dangerous territory if the protest, instead of saying, we disagree with Kathleen Stock, is going, Kathleen Stock should not be allowed to speak at all. And you develop a culture where when there's people that you firmly disagree with, you pressure institutions to disinvite them or to cancel, quote unquote, them.
Well, there we are. Thank you very much. Thank you to Rebecca, to James, and to Titus for coming on. This has been The Big Picture. I've been Felix. Thank you, everyone, for listening, especially those listening from Barcelona. We have indeed gone international. And we're going to wrap up by this song, which I've been told has links to this topic. So enjoy. And until next week, goodbye.